The animation industry is on the brink of collapse, and no one is talking about it. There are 5 major reasons why the industry is at a breaking point, and the 5th thing is by far the one that will harm its workers the most. And the reality is, it's only going to get worse. Despite how grim this seems, there may be a light at the end of the tunnel. There are 2 important silver linings that I'll discuss at the end of this video that will lead towards a better future for animation, one created by the artists, not the shareholders. We are at a pivotal moment where the animation industry's future hangs in balance, threatened by AI and corporate strategies. This is a wake-up call for creators and supporters alike to understand the stakes and champion a movement that places artists at the forefront of innovation. So who exactly is at risk, and how can we collectively steer towards a more artist-driven future? Before we answer that, I need you to help me spread this message as widely as possible. Please tap the like button on this video and share this video with a friend. I want to use my platform to increase the awareness of the animation industry's current state and the worsening conditions if we remain passive. But I can only do that with your help. If you don't know much about the animation industry, the fact that it's in crisis mode might come as a surprise to you. Movies like Across the Spider-Verse, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Mutant Mayhem have been successful, seemingly indicating a really bright future ahead for these new styles of animation. Even the Mario movie made over $1 billion, so you might assume animation is doing pretty well. Behind the scenes, the last few years of animation have actually been some of the most challenging in its history, setting the stage for a story that's far more complex than the box office numbers suggest. When the pandemic hit in 2020, it destroyed many jobs in Hollywood, since much of the work was on set or in person. The animation industry, however, was a different story. Since the nature of our jobs was mostly computer work anyway, we were back up and running within a week. Through 2020 and into 2021, the studios, desperate for content, increased their investment in animation because this was the easiest type of content to create fully remote. There was also a larger demand for it as animation streaming increased by 22% during the pandemic, the most of any category. With all this money pouring into animation, a bubble started to form. This was the height of the streaming wars, and studios were looking to get as much content as they could to entice people to sign up. If you recall, it was an animated film, Trolls World Tour. 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 If you recall, it was an animated film, Trolls World Tour, that was the first movie to release on digital at the same time as its original theatrical release. This strategy yielded great returns for Universal. Netflix ramped up their own animation division, with Ted Sarandos promising to release 6 new animated features every year. For those of you that don't know much about animation, that is crazy. Under Bob Chapek, Disney encouraged Pixar to create more content for Disney+, including their first TV series. Warner Brothers was pushing HBO Max hard and original animation like Scoob and the Harley Quinn show. It really felt like animation was finally being taken seriously, but a lot has changed in the last 4 years. You see, there's a perfect storm on the horizon. The stars are aligning and they're about to release the Titans. There are several circumstances that are all coming to a head at once. The next few years might be the worst time in the history of the animation industry, and it's for the following 5 reasons. The first reason is that the studios have finally realized that streaming services are a money pit. The past decade in animation resembled a gold rush. Streaming services, flush with investor cash, flooded the market with content, competing for subscribers in a winner-take-all mentality. The pandemic showed an increase in demand for animated content, and studios, eager for a piece of the pie, staffed up its animation teams and greenlit a high volume of animated projects for streaming. As with most gold rush mentalities, the reality of the situation was much different than these prospectors had in mind. It turns out that, to nobody's surprise, the economics of streaming are simply not as lucrative as theatrical releases, and so the increase in spending during the pandemic became a bubble, and now the workers that were staffed up with false promises are feeling the repercussions. Studios traditionally made a significant portion of their profits from the box office sales. Streaming, on the other hand, relies on subscription fees, which are split with the platform and often don't generate the same level of returns, especially considering the high cost of producing this high quality content. If you've been wondering why your Netflix subscription increased 200% in the last 7 years, or why you can't share your password anymore for Disney+, it's mostly because these studios are seeing the writing on the wall. The bubble is bursting. Studios have shifted their spending priorities to invest in projects that they know will yield high returns, aka remakes and sequels. This also means that spending a lot of money on original animation is no longer a priority for these studios. In fact, the CEO of Paramount, Brian Robbins, came out and said it. "We're not going to release an expensive original animated movie and just pray people will come." To which Guillermo del Toro responded, "Dear Lord." But Brian here is not alone in thinking this. The most popular animated series today is currently Cocomelon, a show with famously cheap production costs and a subpar animation quality. But here's a little insider secret. The studios don't care about the quality. The only thing they care about is that CoComelon is the #3 most subscribed YouTube channel, and it generates millions of dollars in revenue. Studios want to spend as little as possible on animated content moving forward. By the way, there's apparently a CoComelon movie in the works at DreamWorks. I had to find that out while researching for this video, and now you have to live with that information too. The second reason that the animation industry is at its worst point in history is that almost every single studio is currently engaged in massive layoffs. Despite previously embarking on massive hiring sprees during the pandemic, studios now appear lost in their next steps and responding paradoxically with widespread layoffs as their go-to strategy. In November of 2023, Netflix Animation announced its plan to lay off a third of its feature animation team. They have reduced the amount of promised yearly animated films from 6 down to 2. Netflix also shelved many of its film projects, which will never see the light of day. Disney stated that in January 2024 that it's laying off 20% of Pixar, reversing its decision to make animated series for Disney+. This is mostly because Disney lost almost $1 billion the year before, but that's not all. In other areas of the industry, including animation-related roles in the video game industry, DreamWorks Animation has laid off hundreds of workers, Warner Brothers has shut down Rooster Teeth, Microsoft laid off almost 2,000 workers from Activision Blizzard, and shut down 4 different Bethesda studios, Arcane Austin, Alpha Dog Studios, Roundhouse Games, and Tango Gameworks. Sony is laying off 900 workers from Sony Interactive Entertainment. Paramount announced plans for layoffs to affect its animation division. Unity laid off 1,800 employees. Riot Games laid off 11% of its global staff. Electronic Arts laid off 670 employees, and that's all in the last 4 months. The situation is particularly frustrating because these layoffs follow a period of rapid hiring by these same companies. Animators and production workers were brought on board with the promise of long-term projects and a stable career path. It used to be that if you were a Disney animator, you could feasibly work there for 15 to 20 years. But there is so much turnover happening that this is no longer a possibility. The most unsettling aspect of this situation is the lack of consequences for those at the top. While animators lose their jobs and their livelihoods, the executives who made the initial decisions to ramp up spending on streaming are largely unscathed. They may even receive bonuses for cutting costs through layoffs. This disparity is creating an immense sense of frustration and the feeling that the burden of the industry struggles falls disproportionately on the artists who are creating the content. But if the studios are laying off all of these artists and production workers, then who exactly is going to make the future of animated films? The third reason that the animation industry is collapsing is from an increase of outsourcing to other countries with cheaper labor. In addition to reducing the amount of spending on animation overall, the studios are also changing the way that they do spend money, and more importantly, where. 2D animation for TV has been outsourced for a long time, but it seems that within the last few years, this is starting to affect feature animation as well. This is not without precedent though. Sony Pictures Imageworks used to operate in Culver City until around 2014, when they packed up and moved most of their production up to Vancouver. One of the people in charge of overseeing the shift was Randy Lake, who was named DreamWorks' chief operating officer a few years ago. He's the one responsible for laying out DreamWorks' plan to lay off hundreds of artists and production workers in favor of taking advantage of foreign tax credits. You see, DreamWorks has started shifting away from fully in-house animation production by outsourcing a large amount of work to a Canadian studio, which, by the way, is Sony Pictures Imageworks. Within the last few weeks, DreamWorks has reportedly laid off hundreds of artists, many of whom I used to work with directly. DreamWorks Animation claims much of their layoffs will be through natural attrition, which is corporate speak for letting contracts of the workers expire without paying them a severance. NBC Universal is clearly trying to make DreamWorks function more like their cash cow, Illumination Studios. Illumination has been working with external vendor studios outside of the US since its inception. They've also generated billions of more dollars in the last 10 years than DreamWorks really ever has. Unfortunately for DreamWorks, the math just isn't mathing, and NBC Universal has ordered them to start finding ways to cut costs, hence the outsourcing. Disney also recently opened up Disney Animation Vancouver to take advantage of those same tax credits. It's not too much of a stretch to think that the future of Disney animation belongs in Vancouver and not in Burbank. But hey, at least they can say they're not working with a partner studio since they already own that partner studio. Now, don't get me wrong, I have the utmost respect for the animators up in Canada, and I think it's great if they can find work. But unfortunately, the studios don't have that same level of respect. A scathing article from Vulture last year detailed just how chaotic and brutal the working conditions were at Sony Pictures Imageworks for Across the Spider-Verse. An artist was quoted as saying over 100 people left the project because they couldn't take it anymore. The animators were forced to work 11-hour days, 7 days a week for an entire year with constant revisions and for very little money. The reason that studios are able to get away with this is partially because Canadian animators are not unionized to the same capacity that American animators are, which is another reason why those foreign tax credits look so darn appealing to these studios. These brutal conditions are not only happening in Canada, but all over the world. Animation studios in South Korea, India, the Philippines, Japan, and more consistently overwork their animators for a reduced rate. The deadlines are unrealistic and the animators are overloaded with shots, but oftentimes the studios will make their artists sign NDAs so that they don't speak out about these harsh conditions. Some of these studios also work on American animated TV series. Most US productions outsource their animation overseas, such as Family Guy, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Clone Wars, and pretty much every DreamWorks TV show. Recently, artists at studios like MAPPA in Japan have started to leak how brutal the working conditions are, and I hope that more stories come out about these working conditions in other countries and studios. It's unfortunate that it takes leaks for this information to get out, but that's the world we live in. Number 4, in addition to corporate priorities shifting, a lot of corporations are changing hands quite frequently. The film industry is experiencing a wave of consolidation and mergers, and with that comes the consolidation of animation studios. Hollywood studios are famously one of the reasons we still have antitrust laws in the US. In 1948, the Department of Justice filed an antitrust lawsuit against the 8 largest motion picture companies at the time, effectively preventing them from engaging in monopolistic practices. But in August of 2020, the DOJ repealed these decrees, effectively giving the green light to these studios to consolidate all they want. When Disney completed its acquisition of 20th Century Fox, this included Fox's animation studio, Blue Sky. It only took 8 months for Disney to shut down Blue Sky and absorb its IP into the Disney family. Hundreds of workers were suddenly displaced because Blue Sky was pretty much the only large animation studio operating on the East Coast. Famously, one of Blue Sky's last projects, Nimona, was canceled by Disney after Blue Sky was shuttered. The movie ended up surviving and was finished up by DNEG Animation for Netflix. It even got a Best Animated Film nomination over Disney's Wish. The reason this story is incredible, aside from how phenomenal the movie is how rare this comeback story is in our industry. 9 times out of 10, the projects that people dedicated years of their life to will be shut down in a heartbeat and might never see the light of day, meaning that artists can never use those shots that they created to showcase their most recent work on their portfolio. And that's what happens when studios consolidate. As Disney's situation demonstrated, running multiple animation studios where one is clearly more successful than the other doesn't make business sense. Now that other tech companies are entering the business like Apple and Amazon, who virtually have unlimited resources, the studios are struggling to stay relevant, and they believe that merging will make them more competitive with these streaming services, which means that overlapping departments and redundant positions will be eliminated. My biggest fear is that the same could happen to DreamWorks Animation. They've already been hit hard with the layoffs and the plan to start outsourcing their animation production to Canada, and all it would take is a few underperforming movies for NBC Universal to consider the future of the studio. You might think that they'd never do this, that NBC respects the legacy of DreamWorks, but history shows that corporate decisions often prioritize financial gains over any creative integrity. Considering just how profitable Illumination is compared to DreamWorks, it's not unfounded to worry that DreamWorks could face a similar fate as Blue Sky. This is the sobering reality of the animation industry under capitalism. The beautifully creative voices at this studio, the artists whom I was lucky enough to call my coworkers and still call my friends, could suddenly be silenced one day because an AI indicated it would be better for the shareholders if Illumination animated Shrek instead. And speaking of AI, time to talk about everyone's least favorite acronym, AI. 2 years ago, it seemed like AI was decades away from becoming a real threat to Hollywood. But suddenly in the last several weeks, several companies have shown significant strides in generative AI. Most notably was OpenAI's Sora, a text-to-video AI that yields stunning results. Now the threat of displacing workers with AI is very real. According to a study by the Animation Guild, by 2026, more than 118,000 animation jobs will be affected in the US to be consolidated, replaced, or eliminated by generative AI. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the co-founder of DreamWorks, even said that AI will eliminate 90% of artist jobs on animated films. Though Jeffrey also founded Quibi, so take that with a grain of salt. I need to be clear here. I am personally of the mind that AI is a tool, but we need to follow that logic all the way through, because when we do, the displacement of workers doesn't really make logical sense. Most CEOs will agree that AI is a tool, saying that it's like a power tool versus a screwdriver. But imagine a construction foreman building a house who gets some really shiny new power tools. The foreman determines that these new power tools are so easy to use that they turn around and fire the experienced carpenters in favor of having unskilled workers handle complex construction tasks with these new power tools. If you were worried about the quality of the house, wouldn't that be concerning? Isn't this ridiculous? This is a false cause fallacy in logic. Ease of use does not negate the value of expertise, akin to assuming a power tool's efficiency renders a skilled carpenter's experience unnecessary. Unfortunately, that seems to be exactly what's going to happen in Hollywood. OpenAI is currently meeting with Hollywood studio executives to show how they can utilize their new tool. But if you notice, they're not meeting with any creatives at the same studios, like animators or VFX supervisors. This approach might lead to even more layoffs rather than empowering artists with AI to enhance their efficiency. Despite CEOs claiming AI will boost productivity, the reality often shifts towards reducing staff under the guise of saving time and money, mirroring the flawed logic from earlier that more efficient tools require fewer skilled workers. There's always the advice of learning a new skill to stay relevant, but frankly, this is becoming less and less practical. For years, there have been countless articles encouraging people to learn how to code so they don't get left behind. I'm sure you've seen them. But now, the CEO of NVIDIA is publicly declaring that coding will be a skill offloaded to AI, so even that advice isn't practical anymore. And you know what? He's absolutely right. If you don't think AI will be coming for literally any other skill that you would be teaching yourself, you're in for a rude awakening. Like I mentioned earlier, studios are not primarily interested in high-quality content. These studios are a business at the end of the day, and they care first about what they will get back in returns at the box office. I said this when I spoke up last year about the visual effects in The Flash, and it's only a matter of time before the animation industry feels this as well. These companies are looking for any reason to use AI not as a tool, but as an excuse to significantly reduce spending on pesky human artists. When we say that generative AI threatens the livelihood of artists, this is what we're talking about. Because at the end of the day, ChatGPT is not the one calling in hundreds of artists onto one Zoom call to tell them that they've all been laid off. It's the humans that are doing this. The same humans that receive massive bonuses for saving the company money by implementing these massive layoffs. Okay, so by now, you're probably pretty upset by the state of the industry. Believe me, it's pretty much all I've been thinking about for the past year or so. And it's a real bummer, but I don't want it to seem like this is the end of the industry. The animation industry will survive, but only if we take decisive action now and control exactly how this industry adapts. The way I see it, there are two major silver linings ahead. So the first thing you can do to help shape the future of this industry is to support indie animation. We are going to see the rise of auteurs and smaller teams in the next few years as a reaction against the dominance of commercial blockbuster cinema. We're already starting to see indie studios beat Hollywood at their own game, like the small Oscar-winning VFX team for Godzilla Minus One. I don't think it'll be long before an indie studio wins Best Animated Film at the Oscars. Additionally, with the rise of new mediums like spatial computing, indie studios have a chance to create the playbook for some amazing stories for future generations. My own indie animation studio, Zop Studios, is developing our first animated short film for VR called New Venice. It's sort of like WALL-E meets Metropolis in VR. I won't take too much time discussing it here, but you can learn more about this project as well as when our Kickstarter will go live at the link in the description. But that brings up another related point. If you're not sharing your own work on social media, you absolutely should be doing so because you really never know who's going to see it. It's how a 14-year-old Lego animator, Preston Matenga, wound up working on Across the Spider-Verse. If he never shared his work online, it would have never gotten seen by the filmmakers. I also shared a Bionicle animation I made for fun with another artist, and it's sitting at a cool 1.7 million views on Instagram. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never know what will go viral, so share your work, even if it's not done yet. Now, this is all great news for indie artists that have the capacity to strike out on their own, but for the artists that are currently in the larger studios fighting for their right to work, it's a very different environment. Eventually, the studios will want to hire artists to clean up AI-generated content for a significantly lower rate. And I know this because the studios wanted to do the same exact thing with the screenwriters last year. They floated the idea of hiring writers to clean up AI-generated scripts for lower rates, something that was taken off the table when the WGA went on strike and got protections against this very practice. Which brings us to why striking right now is so important, and the second major silver lining. This silver lining is more complicated, but let me explain here. There is a chance that Hollywood might shut down again this summer because of the upcoming negotiations between the studios and IATSE. IATSE is the largest union in Hollywood. Animation workers in the Animation Guild, or TAG, are part of IATSE. They negotiate their master agreement separately from the IATSE basic agreement, though it references the basic agreement for health and pension benefits. TAG's master agreement expires at the end of July and will not renegotiate until August. Therefore, if IATSE strikes this summer, TAG will have the option to participate in solidarity actions authorized by their their union. But separately, TAG could vote to authorize their own strike against the AMPTP, which would mean many large studios would be without their animation workers. It is important to note that negotiations are going well so far, as many of the major locals in IATSE have already reached agreements ahead of the general negotiations. But more importantly, these upcoming negotiations are the final chance we will ever get to keep these kind of jobs. Now, as a brief disclaimer, I am not a member of IATSE and am in no way affiliated with them. I do have many friends that are in the union, but the following are my own opinions based on my own experience. I'm just very concerned about the future of animation and the film industry as a whole, and I don't want to see them lose everything that they've worked for. As painful as strikes are, I actually think this is one of the more important ones for animation. Not only will it lead to radical change if they succeed, but there's actually a precedent of animation workers striking successfully. In 1941, the workers at Disney went on strike after years of long hours, low pay, and broken promises. Even Snow White's record-breaking box office numbers didn't translate to fair treatment for the workers. Their 4-month strike proved historic, forcing Disney to recognize the union and paving the way for better working conditions not only in animation, but the film industry in general. This was one of the first instances of a successful strike in Hollywood, and in the end, the studio realized that the workers had the power and gave into their demands. There's a lot of similarities between the working conditions in 1941 and today. These strikes are about making working conditions better for future generations so they don't have to experience the same hardships. The writers and actors got much of what they asked for by striking for so long, including some protections from AI. In my opinion, animators need to demand better working conditions from the studios, especially in light of the increased demand for animation content. They should also be asking for workplace safety measures such as guarantees regarding remote work options, mental health support, and measures to prevent crunch time. They should be pushing for job security measures, including longer-term contracts and severance pay. Most importantly, they should be demanding protections against the displacement of human labor by AI technologies, including requiring human oversight of AI-generated content, or at least compensation for the use of AI that directly impacts their job. Frankly, if protections against AI are not included in these upcoming negotiations, then the jobs might not exist by the time the next round of negotiations happen. This doesn't just go for animators either. If studios are allowed to use generative AI, that means everyone who would normally work on set to get that footage will suddenly be out of a job. All the camera crews, the lighting crews, the stunt performers, the hair and makeup teams, the extras, the production workers, all of them will suddenly find themselves out of a job. We are at a crossroads right now where the technology is new enough to start putting in safeguards for the humans that will be affected, and it's not too late to get protections against AI in writing. The WGA did it last year, and IATSE can do it again this year. Look, striking is not an ideal situation. I am very empathetic to the fact that not everyone's situation is the same, and some people are still struggling from the strikes last year. I get that. But at this moment in history, it's crucial to remember why such measures become necessary. Strikes aren't just about the immediate grievances. They're a call for long-term sustainability in our profession, respect for our craft, and a fair share in the industry we pour our hearts into. It's about making our voices heard, demanding respect and recognition we deserve, and securing a future where we're not perpetually on the brink of losing everything we worked for. If you are a member of IATSE or you're working in the film industry, start preparing now for the possibility of a strike this summer. If you're completely outside the industry but still want to support these artists, the union will provide updates on whether or not to boycott any particular streaming services or specific projects, so make sure to check with IATSE if and when that time comes. You can also share this video with your friends and family to help them understand that this is a crucial time, not just for the artists in the film industry, but this could also set a precedent for every other industry that is seeking to replace its workers with AI. To my fellow animators in Canada, I encourage you to discuss unionization efforts with each other. The work that will be outsourced is coming your way, and you will be overworked and underpaid if you don't stand together and speak out. There is a Canadian animation guild that is already part of IATSE, and you can learn more about it at the link in the description. This goes for animators outside of North America too. I know every country's situations are different, but collectively, you have the power to stand up for better working conditions. I wanted to make this video because I feel so passionately about the animation industry, clearly, and I hate to think that it'll be desecrated created in the next few years. I've made lifelong friends from this industry, and it's full of some of the most genuinely good people that I've ever met. Everyone in animation is basically the polar opposite of the typical Hollywood personality, and it's made working in this industry so much fun. Our industry is really small, and people you work with on one project will find a way back into your life several projects later. These humans deserve to keep their livelihoods and their dreams alive. We all understand that what we do is not life or death. We're making cartoons. We're not nurses or surgeons or coal miners, and we're not risking our lives every day. But our work is important to people who need a break from the stresses of everyday life and just want a glimmer of escapism. The worlds that these human artists create in our industry are more important to people than even we realize, and none of us want to see the spark of creativity extinguished by a few studio executives looking to buy a bigger yacht. If you've made it to the end of this video, please share this video and leave a comment about what your favorite animated movie means to you. If you're curious about the roles in animation that are not animators, you need to watch this next video where I break down a department you might not have heard of. Until next time, thank you for watching.